There has been so much happening since our last episode. Trump was elected and won the popular vote. You have Barstool Sports feuding with Zach Bryan. In Texas, the session is creeping up on us. And how can we stay informed when nobody feels like they can trust the media? There's so much sweet tea to spill. We got to get started. Today to talk about all the stuff that's going on, I have the senior editor from the Texan joining me, McKenzie DiLullo. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ariana.
So you are also, people can find you at your different podcasts as well. You guys do one, it's called Smoke-Filled Room. I've been enjoying that a lot recently. Is that one's a monthly basis, right?
Yes, that one's monthly. It's with me and our senior reporter and managing editor, Brad Johnson. And we just go into all the details of Tex Leg and what's happening in the legislature statewide. Post-election, we'll do some election analysis. We have a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's really actually interesting to get all that background information that you don't otherwise usually get from other types of reporting. And then if people just need to get even more of their fix from you, they can find you on the weekly roundup, right?
Roundup, yeah, that's weekly. It's our whole team. We have so much fun. Smoke-Filled Room's definitely more niche, definitely more like it's a smoke-filled room, right? It's that politics behind the scenes.
It's for the nerds who really want to get into
the nerds,
and also for people who like some tea. That's maybe why I watch it.
We spill a little tea.
Yeah,
for sure. And then the weekly roundup is essentially going over the news stories of that week. And I have our entire reporting team, super talented folks joining me on that one.
And the Texan is an online publication. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you guys do?
I would love to. So we were founded in 2019, and essentially our founder, Connie Burton, said, hey, even in Texas, we are seeing that the media here is very left of center, that they're very biased, and they have no shame in doing so. And so what she did is set out to found a company that would kind of go to the old school basics of what journalism is supposed to be. The who, what, when, where. Present that to the reader, to the listener, and let folks make up their own minds. So we are a subscription-based company that sets out to do just that. We focus on state politics and policy. So what's happening at the Capitol, what our federal guys are doing in D.C., and essentially that's just what we cover on a day-to-day basis. We have a team of reporters both in Austin and throughout the state, and it's just an honor to work there. I have so much fun. We have an awesome team. We get along and have a great time, but we also just really believe in our mission and what we do.
And I really liked where you guys fit within media and journalism, because there's a lot of people who and I like whenever they're at least transparent about it, where they come from, like where their biases are and how they're going to be framing everything. But one thing I really respect about you guys is you try to have that unbiased take and just give people, like you said, give them the news and let them be able to decide what to do with it.
I will say too, in our our gripe, just like you were saying, was with mainstream media, is that folks don't own their biases. So in our code of ethics, we say we're right of center. Our founder is a former Republican state senator. We can't shy away from that. But we don't want you to be able to tell based on how you consume our content. We just want to be very upfront that like we're a right of center publication, but we don't want you to be able to tell based on reading our articles.
Which seems like such a good balance to be able to have and like have someone in the movement like that. So I want to know, because you're a senior editor of this publication, you're like still pretty young, like how do you get into that position?
Yeah, I think you just right place, right time. So before I was at the Texan, I was running campaigns. I worked at the Capitol, was part of the legislative process, kind of one of those staffers that crawl around Austin here. That was me. And I worked for state rep in the Capitol, ran his primary campaign, was hired to run Connie's 2018 Senate re-election campaign. And it was awesome. It was an incredible experience.
Is that the first time that you had met Connie?
Yeah. Or no. And I remember, this is the wild thing too, and I said this before, but I remember I grew up in Washington State, Seattle area, and I was watching her initial run because it was like national news that there was this Republican going to take over Wendy Davis's seat. That's who she was at the time. And I Washington,
forgot that the seat that she took over. Yeah.
So she flipped
and like background for people who maybe haven't been in the political scene as long. Why was that such a big deal? Like who was oh my goodness, what's her name? Oh, Wendy Davis.
Wendy
Davis. Yeah, thank you.
So Wendy Davis became a national figure after she filibustered a pro-life bill on the Senate floor in Texas. And it became this huge story. She wore her tennis shoes. Those became pretty iconic for a long time. And Connie was the person
and like just to like emphasize even more, she had the nickname Abortion Barbie.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes, that was her nickname. And she ended up running for governor against Abbott. But before that, or right before she exited, Connie was like, hey, I'm going to run against you and take back Senate District 10, which was a swing district. Now it's been redistricted a little bit, so it's more solidly Republican. But at the time, it was a swing district, and Connie secured it. Like, she flipped it back red. So, and she certainly had a lot of grassroots support and still does to this day, because she went into office and did what she said she was going to do, right? So Connie had this big following, which then, folks have kind of followed her at the Texan and subscribed and supported us here because of her record. But that was the background there. So I worked for Connie on her reelection. That was in the Beto wave. So her reelect was in the Beto wave. And she was one of the 2 Senate seats that Republicans lost that year. And I kid you not, it was like 3 or 4 days after the election, and Connie calls me, and everyone's like devastated, right? Like, oh, we lost. And Connie goes, okay, we know what we're going to do. We're going to start a news publication. And I was like, what? It's been like 3 or 4 days. It was her and her husband. And that's just how they are. They go to the next thing and they're on it. And I just had such faith that they'd make it a success, and they have. So that's how I was the first employee at the Texan, set up the bank account, right? And I think after a long time, I started out just in operations and just making sure things happened, dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and just kind of being whatever I needed to be at that moment at a startup. And fast forward, and now I get to work with our awesome editorial team, and I'm so grateful to get to work with them.
Do you guys feel like you still have like the startup mentality?
Oh, totally.
Like that?
Oh my gosh.
It fits really well that you guys are located in Austin.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it fits. But we all do, we all wear many hats and make sure that everything gets done, and you have to be that way in a startup.
Yeah, and I guess similarly, because I'm in the nonprofit world, we're always having to wear hats like that. But yeah, the startup people definitely feel that too.
Yeah.
But you mentioned you were in Seattle at the time that this was all happening, and you were seeing Texas make national news. So how long were you in Seattle, and then what motivated wanting to take a bigger step in being part of Texas?
Yeah, I grew up in Seattle my whole life. So I was born and raised there. Beautiful area, seriously, unbelievably gorgeous. And moved to Texas in 2017 to work the legislative session. So I got an opportunity through some contacts I'd made through Patriot Academy, which is like a legislative youth camp, essentially, a mock legislative session, and just ended up working at the Capitol, and I was like, oh, I'll be here for 6 months, right? Session's 5 months, and haven't gone back since.
What, so were you going to go to any state that had an availability like that, or was there something that made you want to go to Texas specifically?
I've always loved Texas.
Oh, really?
I have a special place in my heart for Texas, and now I've been here 7 or 8 years, so I really do feel just grateful to be here. But I think the Texas political scene is a very unique scene, right? It is a very big pond. I think other than DC, I think Texas is the most active political pond in the country, and there's so much going on, and there really is a lot at play. So it was very interesting to me from that perspective, right? We have 150 House reps, 31 senators, a bevy of congressmen. It's very interesting to watch all of it happen, and there are very few states with like the political apparatus that Texas has, which makes it 10 times more fun to work in.
So I noticed that you're wearing Western boots today. When did those come into the picture? Was that like a pre or post Texas style choice?
This is gonna date me a little bit. My grandpa bought these for me when I was like 14. They still fit, so it tells you how big my feet were when I was 14.
No, actually, my favorite pair of boots I got in middle school, and I still wear them.
Yeah,
so
they work, right?
Well, yeah, and boots can last forever if you
take care of them. I definitely had to have them taken care of. And
so you had these pre-Texas. You really have been into that kind of thing for a while.
Apparently.
And you're also a country music fan too, right?
I am.
Did that start when did that part start?
Well, I think folks what they don't realize about Washington is over half the state is very agricultural and rural. So there is a big country music scene up there. We have an awesome venue called the Gorge Amphitheater that's like in the middle. It's awesome. So there's certainly a lot of country music fans up there, but I think that's it only amplified once I came to Texas, and you have all the access that we have in Austin to awesome venues and artists, and I mean Austin's a crazy music city, so it definitely amplified once I got here.
Well, the reason I wanted to bring it up, yesterday we had a conversation, and I didn't even realize that there was this drama happening with Zach Bryan, and that's partially because I'm not in the country music scene, but and also just there's been a couple of other things going on in the news recently. But okay, you brought this up. I did some research. And I did not realize that there's been a whole feud between Zach Bryan and, well, now Barstool Sports kind of got pulled into it. Yeah. What is happening there?
Thank you. I'm so glad you asked. So Zach Bryan, country music artist, he's touring stadiums, right? So there are only a few people touring stadiums right now. So that tells you how big he is in not just the country music scene, but just the music scene at large. My husband and I would say we were really big fans of his. We loved Zach Bryan. And his music, and his whole vibe is very Oklahoma boy, homegrown kind of vibe, very wholesome kind of vibe. Certainly in his lyrics, he'll talk about his difficulties with certain things, but he's very, that's kind of his whole vibe, is Oklahoma boy. We love his music. He was dating this girl who works at Barstool, Brianna. We were talking about this before we recorded, LaPaglia. I don't know how to say her last name, but it came out a couple of weeks ago that he had offered her $12 million to sign an NDA to not talk about their relationship, which an astonishing number. And folks were like, how could he afford to pay her 12? He's obviously a huge deal. Well, I think he earns $1 million per tour stop. So he's doing just fine. And then, of course, questions then were raised about, okay, what could have gone on during this relationship for a $12 million NDA to be warranted? What could have happened? And she essentially said on a podcast that there are a lot of videos I have, there's a lot of things that happened in the relationship. And she talked about a lot of what happened. I think she also held a lot back. She's at this point said she's not going to release any of the videos or anything like that, and she just wanted to be able to share her story. I think what's particularly interesting in this, obviously the $12 million is a fascinating thing in and of itself, but what's also interesting is that she works for Barstool, headed up by Dave Portnoy, and that whole apparatus immediately just went after Zach Bryan. So diss tracks have been multiple diss tracks have been released.
Yeah, the first one actually came out election day, but I think it may have been part of a larger thing. It was called Small Man.
Yeah.
But you can't access it on the other music streaming services now because apparently there were copyright things. And I do believe the copyright part because they came right back out with another diss track called Country Ditty. And if you don't know about the Diddy stuff, you're living under a rock, and I don't need to go into that.
It's horrible.
But part of that, I think, was because of the that was related to the abuse allegations, right? Yeah. And to be clear, I think a lot of what she was saying was emotional abuse. But then I think at one point she'd even said that he had thrown something at her when he was angry.
Yeah. So there's a lot to the story, but I think we don't know a lot of it, which I think is purposeful. Mm-hmm. But watching that whole apparatus, like you said, release Country Ditty and Smallest Man, which is a play on the Taylor Swift song Smallest Man Who Ever Lived. It's really interesting to watch all these dynamics at play. It's very, and to watch. I'm also curious too. He's such a big artist, and I think he still taps into this underground country music artist thing where he's like, I'm Zach Bryan, I'm chill, but he's selling out stadiums. He's one of the biggest things right now in music. I'm curious to see if this in any way affects anything he does, because this is definitely far more reach for somebody that has been wronged by a rock star than just a random girl who dated somebody, right? She has a platform, but I don't know that it will actually. I'm just curious to see how that all goes. He's still on tour.
So because I was just looking up the news stories last night about this, and there's still stuff being published because it's kind of an ongoing feud happening, or so whoever's making comments or releasing whatever song video. But on Reddit, and just for some background, her nickname is Chicken Fry.
Yeah.
And I think because of some older video back whenever Vine was around, I think how she got that. But there was someone on Reddit who was just I don't have space in my brain for someone named Chicken Fry, so this is not going to affect how I feel about it.
That's unfortunately
so
funny.
He might come out of this still having still being selling out stadiums, but I guess we'll see whatever gets released.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in the music industry or just entertainment have had horrible things come out about them and have still been just fine, right? Chris Brown comes to mind.
And I guess whenever you have someone like Diddy coming under the scrutiny that he has right now, everything in comparison looks significantly less than what's happening there.
Yeah, for sure.
But the other reason I don't think that this came up on my feed was it's been just all politics, because right now Trump is staffing in the White House, and again, he won with the popular vote, so that's going to potentially change how comfortable he feels governing for America. But one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show is I want to hear your thoughts about how a Trump presidency could potentially impact Texas.
Yeah. Well, I think right now it's a lot of number crunching just in terms of the election results, right? Because we saw an unbelievable margin increase. And I think folks knew Texas was going to go red. I think Republicans in the state were pretty confident in a lot of their races, but there's still concern in some of these swing districts. Trump won all 4 Rio Grande Valley counties, all 4. And if you look back at the last 10, 20 years, like there are, depending on the math you do, there's like 11 to 14 border counties. For a long time, Republicans would get like 2 or 3, maybe 4 border counties. This time, I think they got 11 out of, our count is 13. They got 11 out of the 13. Unbelievable to see that. Now, Cruz, of course, underperformed Trump a little bit. So if you look at the map and it's red, and that's Trump winning those areas. So if you flip it over and you see Cruz, but Cruz still outperformed anything he's ever seen in that South Texas area. Republicans are still seeing unbelievable returns, and Cruz, love him or hate him, is certainly considered one of the more unpopular statewide elected Republicans. That's just kind of the reputation that he has. And he's still outperformed by so much more than we've seen in previous cycles. Cruz won the Hispanic vote by 6 points. 6 years ago when he was on the ballot, he won it, or he lost it by 29. That's a 35-point swing. It's wild to watch this happen. There are seats that Democrats in the House, like the Texas House, where I'm thinking of HD 74 specifically, where it was like, okay, no, this could be close, but this is a relatively solidly
would you mind giving the
district.
regions for that versus
yes, that's Eagle Pass area.
Okay,
right. So that's again near the border, and Eddie Morales is the state rep from there, a Democrat, and it got very close. There was a while where we thought that there was going to be a flip there, when I think Republicans were like, yeah, we'll put more effort into it next time, was kind of the attitude. Mm-hmm. So in terms of what Trump means now, of course, is curious in that, can this surge of Republican momentum and enthusiasm bleed over 4 years from now when somebody else is on the ballot and not Trump? I think this tells folks, especially national Democrats eyeing Texas, to say, can we go spend a bunch of money and maybe get somebody elected on a statewide ballot as a Democrat? We've just not seen that be possible at this point. And I think this election proves that effort is more difficult even than they expected. Republican, the margin went from like 20 down to like 4 or 5, and then it's back up to 14. So it's kind of a tough uphill battle for Democrats.
Yeah, the Rio Grande Valley especially, like I know for years people are like, well, the Republicans are saying we could flip it, and that they're conservative anyway. But so I went to college starting in 2018, and I'm from the Rio Grande Valley, so that's where I was from. But one of the ways that I used to describe it is like, on the like electoral map, that blue dot at the bottom, that's where I was. So like if they asked where it was, especially like yeah, because like it was 2018, so this was past the presidential, but during the Cruz Beto, like it was around that time. So that was really easy when people were looking at maps and it was coming up. I was like, oh, that's the blue dot. That's how you can find where it was.
Which county are you from?
Hidalgo.
Okay, yeah, lots of change in Hidalgo this cycle.
Yeah, but then Star County did flip red, right?
Yeah, all 4.
So, yeah. So Star County was but that's, I was saying, for like the Texas seat as well. Was that Star County that flipped?
Oh gosh. I'm not remembering.
All that to say, like, the valley's just one big metroplex of its, it's like I always say, like, it's kind of like a suburb without, like, the main city, but I guess it's McAllen, maybe it's Brownsville. Yes. All that to say, like, you're all in that area is where I grew up.
Right? Yeah.
But it is really just weird to see that was a change that happened. Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen after that, but I can no longer use the blue dot as my point of reference where I'm from.
I know. Yes. One of our reporters was saying that it's not maybe too soon to call these new voters Republican voters.
Right. They might just be Trump voters.
Right.
Fair.
But there, regardless, is a down ballot Republican swing. So there are there's a lot of hope for Republicans in those areas. And I think regardless, a lot of these places have turned red. It's just about the margin, right? How much?
So a lot of that we've like discussed now is about like what it looks like for getting people in office. What do you think, like Trump being in, it's really funny. Trump is becoming president at the same time Texas session is starting. Do you think that like his presidency in any way influences the things that we might see during session, or how is it going to influence the lives of Texans having Trump in the White House?
Yeah, well, I mean, half of the attorney general here in Texas, Ken Paxton's job in the last 4 years has been suing the Biden administration. That will change as soon as Trump is in office. So that is immediately something that will change from a state level perspective. But in terms of the legislative session, I think we're going to see a lot of different conversations about how Trump's quote unquote mass deportation plays itself out, what role the states play in that, I think will be very interesting. There's a lot of plans floating around right now and a lot of different ideas as to what that could look like. But that would be a big one, right? I mean, that would take a lot of resources. Who's gonna front that resource ask? I also think, I mean, this is tough, but with Trump in the White House, it does change the conversations about other social issues. I think school choice being the governor's, big legislative priority for the last 3 years really turns some pressure onto Republicans this cycle to pass something, whether it is a super strong school choice proposal or something weaker that is kind of bracketed down.
And actually, let's dig into the school choice thing a little bit more. Because if I'm not mistaken, we have like the biggest freshman class of legislators in Texas that we've seen in a long time, right?
Yeah.
And was that tied to, I think it was tied directly to school choice, wasn't it?
Absolutely. There were so many different factors at play in this primary. And that's what is interesting about Texas. Oftentimes you decide who's going to return to the Capitol or come to the Capitol as a new rep in the primary, right? There are not a ton of swing districts that are decided in November. March and May are really the big ones.
Right. Because the districts are red. The question is who is going to be in that
Exactly.
seat.
Or they're blue, right? So they're
fair.
redistricted in that way, but a lot more red districts in Texas. Of course, you're exactly right. So I think that will be, all I'd say, we've known who the incoming freshmen for most of these districts have been for months.
Right.
And we had a few that were decided on November 5th. But school choice was a huge talking point. The governor poured millions and millions of dollars into the primaries in an attempt to get school choice friendly candidates elected and to replace a lot of these members. There were, of the targets, and a lot of folks even retired before the primary because they're like, this is going to be a bloodbath. Like, I'm out.
Fair.
And same. Totally fair. But I think that there were only two-ish Republicans, typically rural Republicans, who opposed school choice in the primary who survived. And, it was a huge influx of money from Abbott and others to get those folks elected. Now, of course, Ken Paxton's impeachment was also a big point of contention. There was a lot of different factors at play in the primary. But I'd say school choice and that entire push, especially after the legislative session, was a huge part of that and probably the leader in getting those folks elected.
And because Sweet Tea is part of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and school choice is our bread and butter. That's what I talk about all the time.
Yes.
So what other issues do you think are going to be making headlines for you guys during session?
It's interesting because I was just talking about this with our team the other day. Usually we go into session and we're like, okay, these 12 issues are going to be pretty big. I feel like it will be a less policy heavy, like big issue heavy session than we've seen in a little while. I think school choice is going to suck a lot of the air out of the room. I think the Chinese land ownership issue will certainly take up some of that as well.
Actually, we haven't had a chance to speak about that at all on the show. Would you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So essentially there's this movement to ensure that any sort of Chinese encroachment on Texas land ownership can be held at bay, specifically citing ties to the CCP. That's the concern, right? Because some land has been bought up around military bases. They're just concerns about that. Foreign land ownership. It's not just Chinese land ownership. And so that's a big part of the concern. It's just ensuring that, folks can buy land and with priority put in place. And so that was a huge point of contention last session, and it did not make it even past a House committee. And that was certainly something that the Speaker of the House, Dade Phelan, became very he received a lot of criticism for. He appoints the committee chairs, and so there was certainly criticism that he faced after that bill failed to pass because it was a big priority for a lot of Republicans throughout the state, and you can see why. So we'll see. But it's definitely something folks have talked about a ton in the interim, and we'll continue to watch that one.
Right. And this is just, I guess, some background knowledge during the interim, because Texas legislature only meets every other year for half the year, basically. And in between that time, there's still committee hearings going on. So there have been hearings about that issue during the interim, right?
Yeah, it's like fact finding is basically how I'd put it. So there's no bill before the committee that they can actually pass in the interim. The session itself is 140 days. So it's basically from, second Tuesday in January through the end of May. And, folks get as much passed as they can during that period. And occasionally the governor will call a special session which is a 30-day extra add-on at the end of the session. That he can time however he wishes and add whatever he wants to the agenda, but the legislators can only address what the governor puts on the call. So that can always be added on. But in terms of the interim itself, no bills are heard before. It's really just a fact-finding mission where committees are hearing different testimony from witnesses, experts, and that's exactly what happened with the Chinese land ownership bill.
Right. Well, with all of this stuff coming up, and if people want to be able to stay informed about it, where's somewhere that they can go?
Yeah, well, the Texan. The Texan's a good resource for all of that. And we have we're very focused on the legislature because it is so important. And Texas is an unbelievable player on both the national stage and the world stage in terms of our economy. So it's very important to know what's going on. So follow the Texan at the Texan News. We're on
I hear
Twitter,
you might even get a special newsletter if you follow the...
Oh, yeah. Ariana, crazy you mentioned that. We have subscribers get access to newsletters from our entire team. So we have 5 different newsletters that go out weekly. We have 3 that go out monthly, even some Texas history stuff, which is, I think, something our readers really, really love. But all of our reporters contribute to that, and it's so fun. And only subscribers get access to that. Also, our podcast, like you were mentioning, Smoke Filled Room and Send Me Some Stuff, both of those monthly podcasts go out first to subscribers. So they can get, you get access a couple days after they go live, but you get first access if you subscribe.
That's awesome. So that's a good place to find news, to find the background on policy and research. You can always go to texaspolicy.com. Thank you so much for taking time to join me today.
Oh, thanks.
And I hope we can have you back eventually, maybe at the end of session, to do a little recap of everything that happened.
Yes.
Yeah, but thank you so much. And everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Happy Thanksgiving. Next time we'll probably be moving into Christmas mode. So thank you so much for joining, and I'll see you next time.